Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Just as a quick heads up, you may have noticed or not, my voice seems to have disappeared between yesterday and today. So the plan is that we have a bit of a guided panel discussion. If you could help me out by asking as many questions yourselves as possible, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, brilliant. So the plan for today is we understand a little bit more what a career in research is like. So we're going to get two different perspectives. We're going to get one from Professor Sarah Matthews, who's online. She's the head of solar physics at UCL in the UK. And we've got Jean-David here, who has an extensive experience doing postdocs and now works to support science at the ESF. So we'll get to complementary sides of what it's like to work in research. So we'll have presentations by both of them and then like a guided question session afterwards. So there's been a lot of questions, I think, directed at me and around the group yesterday about what it's like to do the transition from master's to PhD, PhD to postdoc, where the career might go. So this is a session that you can use to get an answer to those questions. So take advantage of that fact and ask all the things you were asking me yesterday, basically. Okay, if it's okay with you, Jean-David, we'll start with Sarah.
Of course.
Okay, so if you don't mind just doing a better introduction than I did of yourself, Sarah, and then just sharing your slides, that'd be great.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I think your introduction was fine. Yeah, I'm not sure what else really it's useful to add to what James has said, unless James can think of anything he thinks I should. But
well, so Sarah is the PI or the co-PI of ICE. I don't know if you'll talk about this in your presentation.
Well, I will mention it. Yes, I am the principal investigator for the EUV imaging spectrometer on Hinode. Yeah, I have some co-I roles on the EUV imager on Solar Orbiter and also the spectrometer, which is called SPICE, so spectral imaging of the coronal environment. And currently I am the instrument lead for the short wavelength camera, which ESA are proposing to deliver for the Solar Sea mission, which is the follow-up to Hinode. And various other things. So I guess what I might tell you is that if you stick at this and you go for the academic route, you'll probably end up spending a lot of your time not doing research and doing lots of other things, which are good. But yeah, perhaps wasn't how I expected to spend my time. But anyway, I have a few slides. They're rather dull slides, and I was up until 1 o'clock this morning on a telecon for the Science Working Group for Solar Sea. So please forgive me if I'm not very coherent. I normally need a bit more sleep, but let me share. Right, let's find PowerPoint. There you go. Okay, so if I move, there we go. So is that okay? Can everyone see that?
Yep, that's great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is, and I want to stress, this is only one perspective. There are many. And is it going to let me advance through the slides? So I wanted to start with the conclusion, really, or the spoiler. So in my experience, there is no right route to a research career, and there are many types of different research careers. So the first thing I would say is don't let anybody tell you that you have to do a particular thing or follow a particular path. But if you really want to think about it in those terms, then I would say that the right route is the one that works for you alongside your other priorities outside of work and research, because those are equally, if not more important. Okay. So what are the building blocks of a research career? Well, I think it's probably fair to say that the majority of people who are in research have started out with a PhD. So for those of you who already have a PhD, then I apologize that this is stuff that you already know, but for those of you who might be doing master's programs and thinking about what you're going to do next and how to proceed if research is the thing that you think you want to do, then yes, the one thing that is common to most researchers is that they have done a PhD. But there are some notable exceptions who are very successful, at least in the field of solar physics, and I'm sure in other fields as well. But they are a small number. I think the one thing that I would say about doing a PhD, and I'm sure that if you talk to people who are currently doing them or have just completed them, they'll probably echo that doing a PhD is very different from anything that you've previously done. So, masters has an element usually of individual research in there, but you're still very much directed and constrained in many ways doing a master's program, and the timescales are generally shorter. PhDs are a transition to being very self-directed with guidance, but the level of guidance you get will vary significantly depending on who your supervisors or supervisory team are. And I think it would be unfair to pretend that that PhDs are anything other than a bit of a slog at various points along the way. So I think it's really important to do something that, at least initially, you're quite excited and passionate about. You may change your mind along the way, and there will be. I don't think I've ever encountered a PhD student who has not gone through periods where they think, why am I doing this? How am I going to get to the end of it? So it's very important that you find the support network, whether that's within the department or the group that you're embedded in, or whether that's external, but hopefully it's both. And the other thing I would say is that you need to be resilient. And I think that's true in every aspect of life, and it's something that we've perhaps lost a little bit over the last few years, especially thanks to COVID. Life is not perfect. There will be, ups and downs along the way, and the better equipped you are to bounce back from those, the more, or the happier and the more successful, in inverted commas, you'll be, because you really do learn more from the things that challenge you than the things that go well. So maybe just a few practical tips, or I like to think of skills that I at least didn't think that I would need. I'm sure that all of you are much more organized and have thought about these things before. I just thought I was going to be doing research, interacting with other people doing research, analyzing data, writing papers, and then slowly it dawned on me, and I'm not sure it's fully dawned on me even today, that you need really good project management skills. So especially that beginning of a PhD, depending on how long your PhD is and what funding you have, at the beginning, 3 or 4 years sounds like a really long time. And you can suddenly find that you're halfway through that and panic. So it's important to be really realistic, though, about what you can achieve. So the time that you think it will take you to do something, you normally need to double or perhaps triple. But these are the skills that will subsequently, when you've finished your PhD and you want to stay in research, enable you to manage research projects, go on and manage research teams, or if you decide that actually research isn't what you want to do at the end of a PhD, they'll stand you in good stead for almost any other career that you might want to go into. The other thing that I didn't really think about, although I think students these days are much more savvy than I was back then, is networking. So making sure that you take advantage of opportunities to get to know people in the field at various different career stages. So absolutely the people who are your peers, but also the ones who are a few years ahead of you, and then many more years ahead of you. Politics is the other thing. Understanding the landscape around which decisions are made and how funding works will stand you in good stead. You will spend, if you end up staying in an academic research career, quite a lot of time being embroiled in the various politics around getting funding to do things. And perhaps the most important one is that learn early on when to say no and that it's okay to say no. So doing everything isn't sustainable and doesn't allow you to do the things that you are best at if you're overloaded. So that I think is a very important skill. Okay. So how do you make the transition from a PhD student to a postdoc? So moving from a PhD student to a postdoc is pretty much the standard route for an academic research career. So the networks that you make during your PhD will be really useful there. But I think the points that I want to encourage you to think about are being open-minded and taking opportunities. So, you won't always find that your first job is the job that you really want to end up in, be that the place that you are, the role that you're doing, but focus on what you can get from that opportunity. So research skills are really transferable. So you can, the more that you develop those, the easier it is for you to make the move to the next thing that you really are interested in. It's not the case, I think, that you have to move if you don't want to move. Definitely it limits your options because it's, there are few research posts available, but where, you should not feel that you have to move in order to progress your career. But if you don't do that, then the important thing to do is make sure that you do expand your collaborative networks. Because that will be really useful to you in many respects later on. And when people are thinking about in an academic research career for the next step beyond postdoctoral research, then often they think about fellowships as the stepping stone to getting a permanent position. It is entirely possible to get a permanent position without having got fellowship. I did it. But certainly it doesn't hurt to get a fellowship, because then that kind of nice transition period where you have your own funding, you get to really, direct and focus and perhaps build a small research team and demonstrate then to employers later on that actually you can already do the majority of an academic position. Okay. But I also want to say that there are research careers outside academia. We've had several students here in the solar group who have gone on to have research posts in industry, in government, in defence. The last one may definitely not be for you, depending on how you view these things. But actually, they've all been really, they're all still there. And they're all very happy with where they're at. They're using the skills that they developed during their PhD. They're still doing research, but they're doing it in an environment where actually they don't have quite so many competing demands on their time. So I guess come back to this point about be open-minded about what's out there and actually what might really work for you. Okay. So I then wanted to just briefly touch on this idea of success. So the last bullet point, I think, is the one probably to start with. So success is not about what other people think, it's about what you think and being comfortable where you're at. And then the other point I wanted to make is that all the people that you look at who you think look incredibly successful have all, I absolutely failed at multiple things. But you will never see those things listed on a CV because the way that the world works is that you only put down the things that you do succeed at on CVs. But as I've already mentioned, the things that you don't succeed at actually teach you more than the things that you do succeed at. So the important thing to keep in mind is that, if you don't get some grant that you apply for, or you don't get some position that you apply for, use the experience. What can you learn from that, and how can you know yourself better, but also then move on to the next opportunity and just do something different so that you get the next step that you want to get. Okay, so a little bit about me as a not very good example, I think. So I've had a fairly standard path, at least at the beginning. So obviously I did an undergraduate degree. I did that in the University of Glasgow. At the end of that degree, I thought, actually, yes, I really want to do a PhD. So I applied for several PhD positions in particle physics. I wasn't offered any of them. And then on the day that I got my results, the head of the astronomy and astrophysics group at Glasgow invited me to come and talk to him about the possibility of a PhD. And actually, I and the rest of my class had been down the Union Bar, and a fair amount of whiskey had been consumed. So I wandered up the hill. The Union was down the bottom and the department was at the top. And he said, "Oh, what do you think about doing a PhD in solar physics?" And at the point, I had nothing else lined up. I knew that I wanted to do a PhD. Solar physics is not particle physics. I can absolutely attest to that. But I just thought, well, okay, why not? So I kind of fell into this by accident. There was a bit more method in seeking out a postdoc position. And I think it's fair to say that mostly I've ended up here at the UCL Mullard Space Science Lab because of the contacts that I made during my PhD. So I worked on the Japanese satellite that preceded Hinode during my PhD, which was called Yoko. And one of the instruments on that was built here at MSSL. And I met some of the team in Japan at a conference and a research trip, and then was fortunate enough when I came to the end of my PhD that there was an opportunity to apply for a postdoc position here. This was also about the same time that the SOHO satellite was launched. So I also applied for a postdoc position in Birmingham. I was offered both of them, and I ended up here mostly because my now husband was based in Reading. So there was a personal aspect to deciding that I would be here rather than in Birmingham. So obviously these are things that you should take into account. Then I think I'm a little bit anomalous in that I went straight from the end of my first postdoc and was just a few months into a second one here at the lab when I actually got a permanent position, so a lectureship here. I still don't really know how I managed to do that, but I did, and so I'm here. And then I have gone through the various standard steps of reader, now known as associate professor. I spent a very long time as a lecturer, more than other people might do. So perhaps that makes up for the fact that I got the lectureship early on. I had 2 children along the way, so I juggled that as well. And as we said at the beginning, James mentioned, I'm now a professor at the UCL Mullard Space Science Lab and have various other departmental roles as well. So what do I do? I do lots of things. I mentioned at the beginning, after James prompted me, that I'm the principal investigator for Hinode ICE. So what does that actually mean? That means that I have some responsibilities around securing funding to continue to operate the instrument. And so that's UK funding, UK Space Agency funding from our perspective. But I also have to contribute to making the case for continued support from the European Space Agency. I contribute to making the case for continued support from JAXA and from NASA. I help to coordinate the observations made by the community with ICE, make sure that the data that we provide is high quality, all of those sorts of things. When I get some time, I do still do some research, which is related to Hinode and also other space instruments. I've also been involved in trying to get the UK involved in building ground-based telescopes, and actually what you see up here is DKIST, in fact. So I helped to project manage even, well, the lack of sleep is getting to me, the development of the cameras for that, and we're building on that hopefully to help secure ministerial funding, so government funding across Europe, to build an equivalent European telescope called EST. So there's an awful lot of politics that's been involved in that. And then some of the other things that I do. So some of these things that you will absolutely recognize. So here's an uncharacteristically tidy picture of a tidy desk. So I do analyze data. Obviously, you have to publish those data. You have to talk to people about what you're doing. But if you're going to aim for a career in academia, then you'll probably end up doing some teaching as well. So this is the top picture is one that James will recognize. The bottom picture is a previous incarnation of a group project on a master's project. So I'm the lead for one of the master's programs that the department runs, but also these days I'm the director of education as well. So I have to juggle that with various other things, including these days the development of Solar Sea. So I'm going to just put up a final slide that has a bunch of links that hopefully you can go away and look at later on if you think that they might be useful. Talking to as many people as possible about their research careers and what opportunities are out there is always a good thing. So I just last night put together a few links for resources that might be useful and talk about things that I've mentioned here, but also other things as well. So I think I might just stop there. Maybe stop sharing.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. So there's quite a big list of questions that I'd like to ask. Does anyone have any quick questions now? Otherwise, I suggest we go to Jean-David's talk and go into a discussion.
It's more general. Do the slides also become available?
Yeah, I'll make all the same as yesterday. I'll make all the slides available. So yeah, at the end of the week, you'll get emailed them. Are there any quick questions now? Otherwise, yeah.
So for Sarah, what is your recommendation for a second postdoc? Moving to a second postdoc?
I don't know if you could hear that, Sarah, but what's your recommendation if and when moving to a second postdoc?
So I think if you want to move to a different institution, and so you want that experience and it works for you on a personal level, then I definitely would recommend that, because it's really good to go to other places and to get other perspectives, both from a research point of view, but also, just understanding how the research environment works in different locations, particularly if that's a different country. But I think if you have an opportunity to stay where you are and continue doing something that you really enjoy, then there's absolutely no reason not to do that. So I think it really does come down to what you personally want to do.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other quick questions? Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me. First of all, really good presentation. I'm a master's student here, and I've been talking to people doing PhD in the last months, and like the really big advice that they've given to me is that choose a good supervisor rather than the topic you're really passionate about. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. What do you think about it? Do you agree or?
I think I do agree, but what I also think and hope is that supervisory practices are changing internationally, shall we say. So I think that choosing a supervisor rather than the topic was most important when it was absolutely the norm that you worked with one single person, and the recruitment process relied on that single person, and basically you were a group of two rather than an extended group. Certainly in the UK these days, it's much more common for there to be a bigger supervisory team. We have more, what's the right word? We have different recruitment processes. So you still talk to a supervisor beforehand, but the selection process doesn't rely on whether or not you get on with the supervisor or not. Although it is the case that your PhD will go much more smoothly if you have a report. So I think it's a balance. So if you apply for something that you are really passionate about, but then you meet the supervisor and you think, actually, I couldn't work with this person, or it's going to be difficult to work with this person, then no, walk away. But if you you find somebody and you think, well, okay, they're okay, but they're maybe a bit distracted and a bit busy, but you can see when you visit, and I would always encourage visiting, that there are other people in an extended research group and they're involved with supervising other PhD students, and the other students are telling you that they work together and they work with different people, then I think that scenario can work pretty well.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Any other quick ones? Yeah, go ahead.
Once again, thanks for the great talk. I was wondering that you mentioned that there are basically possibilities in research without a PhD position. Could you maybe elaborate what these people maybe did or what their paths would be? Because I imagine a lot of doors would remain closed to you without having a PhD.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the beginning. So you're talking about research careers out of academia or without a PhD?
Without a PhD, basically.
Okay.
Because you mentioned it, and I was wondering about this.
Yes, so I think it is definitely true that it's the minority of people, but certainly you can, there are opportunities in some places to get careers or get jobs as a research assistant. So that can be within a research team that's doing data analysis or theory or something like that, but can also be instrumentation based. So there are you can in that case often work your way up through different roles in a research group, and maybe do a PhD later if you want to do. So one example is a colleague in Rome, and so she has been in the field now. Well, she's basically the same age as I am, but she's never done a PhD. She's worked within the research group in various different roles there. Initially started out supporting people in so a research assistant role, so above a lab technician, but then gradually getting more responsibility, getting involved in the research, being able to apply for funding. And I know some other people who've done similar things there. So you will sometimes see those posts advertised, and I think it can be you can sometimes think, well, actually I want to do research, so that's not for me because I don't see that that's going to lead to something, but it can.
Thank you.
Okay, I suggest we move on to Jean-David's talk. So thanks again, Sarah. We'll come back to you afterwards and ask you some questions. So
okay, so thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. It's like, I apologize, the slides will be probably a bit rough, but
yeah,
it was a bit short notice.
Yeah, at 9 p.m. last night over sushi, Jean-David agreed to do this presentation. So thank you very much.
So yes, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach, and I'm going to start by introducing my career in research and then how I kind of got out of it. So I worked in space research, planetary science especially, and then I landed a job at Science Connect European Science Foundation as a project officer, which means that now I do mostly project management of scientific projects, especially in the field of space science in Europe. I also help with managing the European Society website and management system. And I do other things, for example, a bit of outreach when I can, these kind of things. But some of my colleagues are much more specialized in this than I am. So I started my studies as an undergrad at the University of Tours in France. So before that, I had a fairly typical parcours with like going through school, middle school, high school, etc. Always had an interest in the sciences, especially my father and my mother were both chemists. So we started very young to do like experiments in the garage. My father could bring some really good chemicals from work. We did things that today would totally not be possible, but hey. So I had this interest in science forever, especially chemistry. All throughout my scholarity, I was there, oh yeah, I want to be a chemist too. And eventually in high school, I discovered geology, which I found was really, really interesting. I don't know, like the rocks, everything that really spoke to me. And it is kind of worrying when rocks start to speak to you, but that's another matter. So I decided eventually to do an undergrad in earth sciences, although like this license has a interesting name, Earth, Environment, and Universe Sciences, covers a bit of everything. So, and it did, which was great because then you get a big overview of the field, but also by the end of my undergrad, I was there. I love geology, it's great, but I have no idea which field of geology I want to work in, because you have like sedimentology, which is looking at like things deposited in rivers, oceans, etc. You have geochemistry. When you look at the chemistry of rocks, you have geophysics. When you look at big events, like for example, seismicity, earthquakes, all these kind of things. So I didn't know what to do, but I knew I loved the ocean. I'm a scuba diver. So I decided to do a master's in oceanic geosciences at the University of West Brittany in the European Institute for Marine Studies. Because the first semester was still quite open. It's still, you still had a bit of everything in geology, also applied to oceans. And then I ended up finally making up my mind, okay, geochemistry. I mean, I want to be a chemist before, geology is just, and that's really what I wanted to do. And then we had a lecturer there, Jean-Alex Barra, who gave us a very interesting lecture on rare earth elements. So at the end of the lecture, I went to talk to him because we need to do internships that year, like in the first year of masters, because in France, masters are 2 years. And so he told me like, oh yeah, I have an internship, but I don't know if it will interest you. I mean, we're in oceanic geosciences. It's about meteorites. And then kind of, we're in his office, he had letters from NASA, this kind of things on his desk. I was like kind of, okay, yeah, where do I sign? So that's why I ended up starting doing meteorite studies, and then in the second year of master's, I did another internship with him for 6 months, looking at especially meteorites from the asteroid 4 Vesta. Then I did a PhD at the Open University, still working on meteorites. My PhD was about the characterization of oxygen isotope reservoirs in the Earth solar system. And so I used this very brutal instrument called a nanosims to look at meteorites, especially at little refractory inclusions. They are the first crystals that form in the solar system. And you can see like these ones are quite big, 45 microns, that's huge. I'm kidding. And then looking at oxygen isotopes in these objects, and also aluminum magnesium isotopes, to try to understand the processes taking place at the very beginning of the solar system. So during this PhD, I had the opportunity to start doing a bit of outreach, which is something that I find extremely interesting, like being able to go talk to the public during different events. For example, we organized observatory visits at the little Open University Observatory. We also had like, for example, kids' days when you are like bring kids to work, and then we give them presentations also, and like make them visit the labs where their parents work, and other kids too. Like we had scouts coming to the university to learn about all these things. So lots of different applications. Also, I was working also at the Natural History Museum during this PhD from time to time, and we also had like big outreach events like Night at the Museum in London, where we had like 20,000 people over one night when they could come and talk to all the scientists at the museum, which was really interesting. So then I moved on for my first postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry in Germany, in Mainz. I think that's one of these points like where she was mentioning networking earlier, and networking is essential. It is extremely important. This job, I mean, I landed because, of course, the job was a bit aligned with what I used to do. I was still studying the same type of objects, so I was using the same type of techniques. So, but I met the professor, well, he's not technically a professor, I guess, who employed me there at a dinner after a seminar at the Open University. Like he was invited to give a seminar on Friday, and then went for dinner with everyone. Then we had a chat in the evening, saying like, "Oh, I'm working on this and that." And then one day I got, then I applied once for a postdoc with them, but at that point, my PhD defense date and even the manuscript wasn't submitted. So he told me, "Oh well, thank you for applying, but until we know when you are going to finish your PhD, that's a bit too uncertain for us, and so we will probably get someone else." I just have enough. But then, you know, like you just put that foot already through the door. And so a year later, I was about to finish my PhD, and he sends me a message saying, "Hey, actually, we have an opportunity. Do you want to apply? Can you write a proposal?" I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And okay, you have 48 hours. I mean, it didn't have to be a very long proposal, but still. So pretty much I took the part of my PhD that was like future works and possible exploration, copy, paste, edit it a bit, and there you go. And so that also shows you that networking is really something that you shouldn't neglect. It is extremely important. And also like he knew someone at the Open University who I knew too, and who I think also put a good word for me. That also matters a lot. So it was really interesting, like for 2 years. So it was still like really in alignment with what I did during my PhD, which is not quite the case of my next postdoc. So I did a second postdoc after this, which you can see like it's 2015, 2017, we still have a bit of time. So from 2017 to 2022, I had a postdoc in 2 institutes. It was 50%, 50% at the beginning between ETH Zurich and Universität Zurich. So it was the idea of this postdoc was to bring a person doing meteorite studies and knowing about this data from the Earth solar system into an astrophysics department to try to see how we could collaborate, because I realized like fairly early on in my career, because I'm going to go back a bit to the Open University days, I was back then in a shared house with like great housemates. Most of my housemates were also researchers. So when we started, we had me working on early solar system material. We had one person doing periglacial structures on Mars, another one doing volcanoes on Mars, and a person looking at astrobiology. So we had like this very kind of nerdy house. It was great. And then we had a couple of changes, like another Martian scientist moved in, and then eventually an astrophysicist moved in, and we had like very interesting discussions at home and at work about sometimes, oh, you are looking at this, but I'm looking at the same problem, like the formation of planets, but from a very different angle. And so these discussions are always like, okay, so we are addressing same questions, same objects. We need to be able to communicate, because it was something that's really hard, communicating across fields of science, even though they are so close, because we talk a totally different language almost. And so when I saw this position about astrophysics and cosmochemistry together at ETH Zurich, I said, okay, I want to do this. This is something that's really interesting. So I had to like forget the rocks a little bit and talk more to computers, and did some coding in Fortran for those who want to assess the pain. And so what we did were simulations of disks, protoplanetary disks especially. So just to show you the animation once more. So the idea was to look at the effect of Jupiter bow shocks to see if it could form high temperatures, to form what are called chondrules, which are little droplets of molten silicate that were molten very early on in the solar system, maybe like within the first million years. And then trying to understand, I mean, the processes to form them has been a matter of debate for decades. These are the best cosmochemistry conferences, sessions to go to. Just bring a pot of popcorn and watch, because like people are arguing. They've been arguing for 30 years. It's beautiful and terrible, but a lot of entertainment. And so we were looking, for example, at the effects of these shocks from the planet Jupiter. That created also a gap that's kind of important in solar system history. And we looked at, for example, different coolings, and in the end, so when you have almost no cooling, oh yeah, you can get like very high temperatures. But when you go down with like more realistic cooling prescriptions, it didn't work. So actually, I went to give this talk to a conference and said, oh, actually, we tried that. It didn't work. And people were very surprised. They go, we don't talk about something that didn't work. It was very refreshing and nice. So even when something doesn't work, it's actually worth putting out there. Then I also did some studies with some colleagues about using smooth hydroparticles, smooth particle hydrodynamics simulations to study the distribution of presolar grains that are like these little tiny grains that are nanometer to micrometer scale that we find in primitive meteorites and that come from other solar systems. And they have like very big chemical anomalies, like you can't have the same composition in the solar system. You can't produce these isotopic ratios. And that's something that we studied. So with these simulations of these grains to see if we could reproduce the same anomalies that we observe in the solar system. So I won't go too much in detail, but also what I also got to do during that postdoc was experimental astrophysics. So we designed an experiment to take on a 0G plane. And the idea was to study how the dust behave in 0G in a gas flow to try to reproduce the instabilities that we thought occurred at the beginning of the solar system. So that was very interesting science, also a lot of fun, I have to admit. So I can't resist showing you this. This was probably like my second round in the net cages, so I had a bit more practice. The first one, I just bounced around, and it was terrible and fun. But yeah, so it's I got involved in this project in a very weird fashion. Like I was approached by one of my colleagues because she knew I'd been doing simulations using dust in these two previous projects. Hence, I also knew the composition of the dust because of the cosmochemistry background. So she asked me, oh, can you review this proposal I'm putting together? So yeah, just read the proposal, make a couple of comments, and suddenly you are second author. And so I helped through the whole project, through the design of the instrument and also running it on the plane. It was very interesting. And then I also came back to my roots during that same postdoc to look at isotopic anomalies in meteorites, trying to find the same presolar grains I mentioned earlier in the refractory inclusions I studied during my PhD, my first postdoc. So I think what I'm trying to show here is that a career in research is not linear, even if you stay. I mean, it can be, but often it isn't. So I've been redoing a lot of different things. I think it was really interesting. I love every bit of it, almost every bit of it. I'm not too keen on writing proposals, trying to ask for funding and writing papers, although I did get a few out, but that's, but yeah, so at that point, and also, yeah, something I should mention is that during my postdoc, especially at ETH and in Switzerland, I got to do a lot of outreach once again, because talking about science, presenting it, sharing science with people is really important. That's really what I love. I also I did a bit of teaching during these times. Especially I got like a couple of interns to do some projects with me for their undergrad and masters. So it was really, really a great time. But then I started to think, okay, what next? I'm going to now explain why I left academia. Because yeah, so far, like you can say, like it was really interesting, but yeah, October 2022, my time at ETH ran out. So in Switzerland, you can't stay in the same university or in the same position for more than 6 years. This is in the law. So if you are at ETH for 6 years, either you get a big promotion. The thing that when you are postdocs, promotion opportunities are not really a thing, and or you have to move to another country or to another institute at least. So I had been there for 5 years and a half, so I couldn't really renew anything. And I'm really glad and thankful to the professor I worked with, Marianne Bachelor, for renewing my contract for so long. But hey, there we go, October 2022, can't carry on, I have to find something else. But I wasn't too worried. So the thing is, in the couple of years before that time, I started the process to think, okay, is academia really the thing I want to do? Because I like the science, I like the research, but I was starting to get a bit disturbed by some of the sacrifice you have to make in academia. And I'm not saying like it's necessarily bad for everyone. There are people who actually strive in this. But for me, I started feeling it wasn't really the way I wanted to continue living my life. So there have been like a few things that really helped me go through this, because we are almost conditioned throughout PhD, masters, being like, okay, career in academia, it's career in academia. If you leave academia, you failed somehow. And it is not true, because something that we have to keep in mind, I don't have the statistics exactly, but when you look at postdoc, at a PhD to postdoc already, not everyone is going to get a postdoc. If you look to postdoc to professor, the percentage is even lower. We are talking about a single digit at best. And I think we are in the lower single digit. People will find a permanent position in academia as a professor. This is sad, but it is a reality, and this is not something that's going to change anytime soon, sadly. So we had quite a few postdocs in our group, and so we all decided at some point to discuss about the uncertainties regarding academia and employability. For example, in academia, a couple of us, I could never, for example, start a relationship. This is something I thought I could do, because especially at ETH, it was a great place to be, but it works on a year-by-year contract, which means that at any given point, I was just a few months away from leaving the country. So how do you start something durable in these conditions? Maybe some people can do it, but for me, it felt I couldn't. So that was one of the reasons. Also, I was really starting more and more to feel, because of pressure and moving countries, I need to start maybe thinking about settling down somewhere. And I don't think that's something that you can easily do. It is possible sometimes, but I don't think it's something you can easily do in academia, sadly. So we had this big discussions with everyone, like really interesting, in depth. So we started to decide, okay, what do we do about it? How do we address these uncertainties well? Or how do we ensure that if we don't stay in academia, we can still do something afterwards? Because often when you're in postdoc, and even more, I guess, into PhD, you don't realize that you can do something else. Because, okay, these are the skills I have. This is the only thing I can do. But it's not true. You learn a lot of very important skills during a PhD and a postdoc. Was it Sarah? Sarah. Yeah, Sarah was mentioning, for example, project management. It is something that you will learn, especially during a postdoc. You start already during a PhD, because you have to manage your own time, you you have to find instrument time. Sometimes, like, like everyone is working on the same instrument, so you need to manage, okay, so I'm going on that day, you are going on that day, or there has been an issue, can we switch? So that's already something very important, is time management that you learn. And also working sometimes as a team, because you are going to be working a bit with your supervisors or with sometimes other PhDs and all the technical staff, and it is really important. So you acquire actually during this academic career a lot of skills that we don't necessarily realize are very important. Also, there is this whole kind of analytical thinking that is actually in high demand nowadays. So that's because you look at different problems from different angles, and that's something that in other type of trainings is not necessarily the case. For example, I've talked to a lot of engineers, and when they get out of engineer school, it's just, okay, this is the way we do it. It's like problem A, solution B, I learned that in my class. Sometimes they don't have, and that's not true for everyone, but this training is meant to format you to give the right, always the same answer to the same question. But sometimes you have to be a bit more flexible, and of course they will learn it eventually, very quickly. But at the beginning, it is difficult. And so we have this flexibility that we learn in academia, because you learn how to manage your research. You now learn how to sometimes to fix an instrument. It's not working. Why is it not working? And so there are a lot of things that are actually usable. But also we talked beyond skills about our values. What is important for us? Well, what do we think we can do, or what we just cannot ever do? For example, in geology, there is a lot of work in the petrol industry. They want people to know what the rock are, to go and dig oil out of the ground or out of the seafloor. And that's something I cannot ethically, myself, I cannot accept doing such a thing. So yeah, I know this discussion, and also we invited a lot of people with different career paths to come to talk to us and tell us about their experience. Some people in academia, some people who left academia and are really happy, for example, being a museum curator. Also people who left academia and then came back. So we had like a lot of very interesting guests and people who were like very interesting discussions. So it lasted for about a year before I got unemployed, and so this reflection was really helpful. It was really helpful to talk to people, because otherwise you just feel, oh, am I the only one thinking this? Am I the only one thinking, oh yeah, academia maybe is not for me, or maybe I like academia, but I just can't realistically make it because it's, I said, like just a few percent that will get to professorship. So, but that point where there, okay, if we leave academia, it's maybe not a failure, maybe it's just the way it has to be, and if we manage to use the things we learn in academia into our next job, it's just actually not a failure at all. Maybe we can just bring something different. And this was all crystallized when I asked the professor I was working with at the time, Maria Schoenbechler, to meet for a meeting with her, because I wanted to discuss with her what her experience as a professor is. What do you do as a professor? What actually is the job? That's something sometimes we kind of forget. But what was interesting for me is that here you see her in the lab, but she hasn't set foot in the lab beyond talking to journalists or taking pictures in almost 10 years. I mean, she would help students, I think, everything, but on the whole, she hasn't been doing her own research for a very long time. It's just a team now doing research, so it's project management, pure and simple. You have to find the funding. You have to find the time to kind of manage everything. You have to manage your team, all the technical staff, but also the researchers. And so I asked her, okay, so do you like it? And she said, oh yeah, I love it. I still teach and things like that. And I like teaching too, so that's something I could have been doing. But the whole kind of, searching for grants all the time, I think I don't think I could have really dealt with the pressure, especially knowing how many people then depended on it. I think that's a lot of sort of work. And that's something that we're not really prepared for, I think, enough in academia, throughout the early stages of a career. But maybe this is changing. But so we had this very outward discussion about, okay, so what do you want to do? And she asked me at some point this question, just kind of what is it that you absolutely love about your job right now? What makes you the happiest? And so I had to think about it a bit. And for me, the best times, I mentioned outreach before because it's been something extremely important to me, going to see the public, a wider audience, talk to them about science, and present to them like some of the recent advancements in the field of research. So I told her, okay, that's my like top one, that and teaching, because yeah, just communicating about science was really what I love. And so that's when I get like, okay, so maybe like yes, being just in academia is not the right thing. Like I like the research, but I hate, as I said, like the grant finding, don't like the paper writing so much. So yeah, and so she told me, you know what, it's not the end of the world. You know, we know that not everyone will be a professor. We don't expect you to be one. We also, during the postdoc, you also learn how to work, like a lot of skills, a lot of things, as I mentioned before. And then you take them out with you in the world when you work the next job. It's not a failure, it's just the way it is. And until everyone can be a professor if they want, that's not going to be realistic that everyone can be. So it is normal, it is expected that many of us will just join the workforce, if you wish, or the world of proper jobs. So it was a very interesting discussion. I think that the one that cemented to me that, yeah, I could really look outside of academia, see what else I could do. And so ironically, I ended up in project management, but also it was not a bad thing. But also what I want to show you here is this folder of all the applications I had to send to find a job. It's not that many, admittedly, but it was in the space of pretty much 3 weeks. I've been extremely lucky.
See my job.
Yeah, I know you can see your job. I told you I applied for it. Okay, so in Switzerland, there are like the unemployment agency is really, really hardcore. They need you to apply to at least 10 jobs a month. Otherwise, you start getting lower and lower return on like unemployment money. So I didn't want that to happen. So I applied to a lot of different things. Like, for example, I applied to be like the scientific counselor to the chief of the armies in Switzerland. So, which I knew I would never get, but you know, you have to send job applications. And so, yeah, like trying to start looking at, okay, what are the kind of things I can do? So I did apply for a couple of academic positions, talking to some professors, etc., but also technical positions. Like I contacted, for example, the companies that build the instruments I worked on during my academic career, saying, hey, I actually kind of can take apart and build back up your instruments. I know how to troubleshoot it, things like that. With a bit of training, I can really be helpful. So, you know, then you start like thinking of all of these kind of things you can do. I applied, for example, for Toulouse at the Cité de l'Espace in France, which is like a big space museum, saying, hey, I do outreach. I know about space things. I could help you. Things so, you know, like you have to start thinking about, okay, it forces you to really think, okay, what can I do? What can I reasonably try to apply for? And I got actually some fairly positive answers from some of them, but the one I got, of course, that is not in this folder because it was a successful application was European Science Foundation. So this one, like like one of my friends told me about this job on the day of the deadline. I had a 40-degree fever. And eventually I just decided, okay, I'm going to apply for it. It's another job application. I write a cover letter quickly, and then I got contacted by our boss Emmanuel, who told me, I would like to interview you, and then the rest just went through. But there were a lot of interesting questions. But, okay, so what is interesting is that he also was a researcher originally, an astrophysicist, who also made that jump. So it was very reassuring to tell myself, okay, my boss is someone who has gone through the same experience. So he knows what it's like to leave academia and move into the world of this project management job. And so that was already very reassuring, and also had a very good contact, very early on from the interview. We just felt, okay, no, I think I could work with this person. And so far it's been great. So if there's anything to take out of it, it's just kind of, okay, moving to industry or to another job outside of academia, it's not a failure. Actually, academia will make you ready for it, even though it can be really hard to realize. You have learned much more than you can imagine during your PhD or during a postdoc, or even like, I guess, during your master's to start with. It's just, there are all of these skills that are extremely important. And it's really hard to recognize it once you are still inside the system. I mean, even when we just feel, okay, it's research, it's writing papers, it's doing my model, doing my analysis in the lab. But there is more than that you have learned. So this is really important to notice. And yes, don't hesitate to have a support group, a network. These discussions with this group of postdocs we had were extremely valuable to realize, okay, I'm not the only one in this situation. No, we're all there. We're all a bit worried about all of these things, and it's totally normal to be, even though we love research and the science. And also, yes, don't hesitate to talk to people that are a bit like who have different career paths. Like I said, like talking with all these guests we are doing these postdoc meetings were great. Talk to your professor maybe at some point if you don't know, like or even to postdocs, PhDs, people who have already been where you are and got a bit further to know, okay, what is it like, and then think, is it really the thing I want to do? Because also my professor told me something like, I have a lot of passions outside of work. I like role-playing games. I do I craft my own costumes. I do cosplay, a lot of things like that. And talking with my professor at some point, she said, okay, so I have to tell you something. Like, if you want to have like a lot of passions outside of work, you can't say if you're a professor. Pretty much, she was saying me like, if you're a professor, your work has to be your passion. And I guess it varies from people to people, from person to person there. But also some things that for me like really seals the deal. We're just kind of, okay, maybe it is time to look outside. So that's also something to keep in mind. So yeah, I hope this was useful, that at least to show you that first, a career in research is not linear. Like, I started as a geologist, I end up as an astrophysicist. Logical, right? And then also leaving this path is not a failure. It's normal. Most people won't make it to professors. That's the reality. And then it's just kind of finding the things that you enjoyed from the research in academia and seeing, okay, where can I find this somewhere else? And so far, I've only been working 6 months at ESF, but I've got to do outreach, going to Fantasy Basel. It's a big, big sci-fi and anime convention. We went to it to kind of talk to people, bring the science to sci-fi, which is great, and it was really well received. I also do a lot of project management. I'm still in contact with the Meteorite or the planetary science community through Europlanet, for example, and through other committees we are doing in other projects. So far in 6 months, it's been absolutely blast. I have a great team to work with, and that makes all the difference in the world. So yes, that's don't be afraid of it. It's more. You are good at what you do, and you are good at things you might not think you are good at. So you don't have to explore these options if you feel at some point that maybe it's something that is worth exploring for you. If really academia is your career, it can work. Some people will make it all to the end, but yeah, also because of the low percentages, not everyone will, even the people who want to. And so it is getting to realize that, yes, but it's not a failure to leave it. So yeah, I hope it was helpful and useful somehow. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use discussion.
Thanks very much. That was excellent. Given you can do a postdoc application in 48 hours and a job application in 24 hours, doing that presentation in 12 hours, I'm sure it's very easy for you. Good job. Do we have any quick questions for Jean-David, or any longer questions even for Jean-David?
I have a question for both Sarah and you, actually. So both presentations were great, and they were honest and sincere. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. It's really valuable. And yeah, the question is, if you had a chance to go back in the time, let's say at the end of your master's or PhD, for example, would you continue pursuing a postdoc, continue your academic career, or would you look for a job in the industry directly? So what's your honest answer to this question?
For me, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm absolutely glad I did the time I did in academia. Met a lot of amazing people, worked on the science, which I absolutely loved. Did discover the world, existed with the study of meteorites, all these things. So I wouldn't change it or anything. I don't regret it at all. So I would still pursue a PhD and this even though in the end I decided that it wasn't maybe what I wanted to do long term. I mean, I still spent 11 years in the academic system, so it's not nothing. But no, I wouldn't change it. I would still do it exactly the same.
And Sarah?
So I was ready to leave and do something else just before I got offered a permanent position, and I quite often wonder whether taking the permanent position was the right thing to do, because actually if you and I totally agree that leaving academia is absolutely not a failure, and that the percentages are very small. So on that second point, because the percentages are very small, if you are lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and get offered a permanent position, then you almost feel guilty about considering giving up a permanent position. And I wonder whether, well, no, I don't wonder. I have often felt that, maybe doing something else and reclaiming some of my life would be preferable. So would I change it? I mean, yes, there are periods when I just think I can't do this anymore because there is too much, but that's balanced out with periods of time and involvement with students. Getting involved with students in particular is really important to me these days, more perhaps than the excitement of research, although doing that is also great. So yeah, I'm very much on the fence. So there were definitely periods where I have wanted to leave and do something else, and I have got caught in that trap of thinking, well, I'm not sure what else I could do. I've been doing this for so long, I should stay. But there are compensations. So I don't think I've really answered that, other than to say that, well, yeah, even if you think that you want to do this and you manage to get past all the hurdles, you still have doubt about whether it's the right thing to do or be doing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you mind if I ask what you would have gone to do if you had turned down the permanent position? Did you have a specific idea?
Patent attorney was the thing that was at the top of my mind at that particular period. I'm not sure I would really have enjoyed that, to be honest. And that's probably, and I did apply for a couple of jobs at the time, which I also didn't even get an interview for. But I guess part of the reason I stayed was that I wasn't sure what else I would go and do beyond that.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Hello. So that was
if you just come here so the microphone.
Is microphone there?
Yeah,
of course, yeah. So that was Demirfis from Austrian Space Forum. Actually, thank you very much for your talk. I end up here falsely. I was supposed to go to Congress Hall, but you said leaving academia is not a failure, and I just stopped in here because I didn't know that my twin bro is here in my career path. So yeah, whatever you said was more than 100% was right, and I'm geologist by training, and by PhD training I'm planetologist and meteorite expert, and I've been there, and I left academia as well for being not in the industry but still in the research, because it is still possible. I just wanted to raise this voice. It is still in the possible being in the research, but not in the academia. Still possible to do your work, because if you're all in here, it means that there's a passion in here. Yeah, there's a little bit being nerd on the background. Yeah, we are all nerds, and having fun with the doing research, and it's still possible. You don't have to I don't want to say hard words, but you know what I mean. You don't have to follow the path of your professor, like 100%. You don't have to give the lectures for him. You don't have to write the papers for them, but for yourself. It's all about networking, guys. It's really all about networking. So hold strong of your networking. Still be ambitious. There's no failure on this path. Definitely, even you are in the industry, you can leave the industry. Even you're in academia, you can leave the academia. You can go backwards and run in between. But there's always a possible way. But if you would like to have a job, have your networking. This is very important. I had maybe 10 times of this job application list as well. So even not getting an interview was the possibility. But either work voluntarily for a while. It's the one thing. I know it's pain a little bit, but if you have this passionate that you can work a little bit voluntarily, get your network, and please, one wish from all of you, from nearly 20 years of experience talks, if you're doing some research, if you are working on some complexities, just simplify that all people can understand, you know? Yeah, being not just writing a paper is a success, but really transferring this knowledge to the public, to the students, to the children even, this is the success. Then they know what you do. And this is really that academia has a failure at that point, that they do not reach the normal public. This is very important. Then you are really successful. Highly recommended. Austrian Space Forum. You can always contact us, to contact me. I will be around today, and we can always talk about the opportunities as well. Yeah, and I will try to connect you to the respective people as I can. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This reminds me, we have a good opportunity here in general. There's so many people in lots of different career paths, as we see, they're everywhere. So take the opportunity to ask them. Yeah, ask them what their career path was.
Yeah, well, other question. Thank you for your talk. Is well, from my experience, and what is, to be more precise, what is your point of view? Well, if you have a title of doctor, to find a job are macro probabilities to find a job with a title of PhD, or is more complicated because, well, it's because if you are a doctor, for example, if you apply to a business company or in the private sector, well, it's complicated to be contract because they have the idea that you will have to be paid more than the average. And well, I say this because, well, from my experience, when I finished my master's degree, after I was in the level 0 of happiness because I couldn't find a job. To apply to a PhD was complicated because, well, in my country it's very complicated to have a grant. I had lucky to, well, my direct supervisor or master helped me with contact with the university when I am studying the PhD. But I am a bit scared to this season of employment when I finish my PhD. So what is your...
Yeah, I would say like the PhD in the outside of academia, it's a double-edged sword. In a way, it's very desirable in some cases. Like there are some jobs that do require it actually, but also, yeah, the problem is that like then a lot of other jobs say, oh, you are overqualified for whatever we have to offer, and that's a bit difficult. It really depends on who you are talking to. But also, it's also highly desirable in some fields. For example, astrophysicists, I find like especially people who have been working with big data, who have done like AI or like some like big data management. Data scientists have been in high demand, for example, with banks. And so after that, like it also depends on you and your values. Do you want to work for a bank or not? But I know, for example, that have been like a big demand. So having this PhD in this kind of type of field, in this case, is a big advantage. So it's really like a case by case question. In some cases, it would be very helpful. In other cases, it would be detrimental to your job application. So yeah, double-edged sword.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you again. I agree that it's very nice to have such two very honest presentations about what it's like. I was wondering, because you get told very often that you can't really leave at one point academia because you can never get back, or like what do you think about that? Is that still possible? Or like, for example, if you like take half a year off after your PhD, or should you really like right at the end continue in either a postdoc or something?
Do you want to go first, John? Did?
Okay. So once again, I want to say like this is also very dependent. It also very depends. For example, the French system. We're actually having a discussion with it with one of my former colleagues this morning. She was saying like, yeah, the French system, if you like, most PhD students are just going to go license, master, doctorate, straight line. And if you deviate from this straight line, even if you take like, for example, sabbatical for 6 months or a year, this is going to play against you in this specific case. But in other countries, actually not so much of a problem. But I think in the UK, at least in some universities, they are much more open to this kind of thing. So really depends. I think those are pretty much. But I personally would think like I kind of regret not having taken some time after my master's and before my PhD. But yeah, that's like a personal thing. And I know like in the university I ended up at, because it's a university that's especially specialized in people who, like the Open University in the UK, it doesn't have any on-site undergrads and masters. It's all done remotely. And so a lot of people go to this university when they kind of, for example, resume their studies after years of working and stuff. So I know some supervisors will find, okay, you have had like all of this experience outside of academia. For example, if you've done a job between, I know like you left a PhD, you have your PhD, you left for a couple of years with a job differently, and then you decide, okay, maybe actually it is for me. Maybe I want to go back to this. So once again, it will really depend who you talk to. Some people will be very open to it and will say, oh, you have got all of this like experience doing your job, doing this and that. And then maybe that won't play against you. Maybe it will even be beneficial, but then it's always a bit harder going back. I think I've met one person who really successfully left for like 5 years, I think, and then she came back and eventually got a like full-time professor position very quickly after that. So of course, it also depends on time, opportunity, etc. But yeah, it might make it harder to come back to academia. That's undeniable. But it's also a great experience that you can bring back with you if you decide to come back to academia. So yeah, once again, really depends on the case.
And do you have any experience with this, Sarah?
Yes, so I think the answer that it depends is the right one. I think in the UK it definitely is possible, and actually there are fellowships that are specifically only available to people who are returning to academia. And I've had some great mature students who have had very long careers in other fields and then decided that they wanted to come back and study something else, do a PhD and then become a researcher. So I am absolutely open-minded to the benefits that doing something else outside of academia can bring to people who do want to come back into academia. But obviously, yeah, depends on where you are and who's doing the hiring and things, but certainly, yes, the UK provides opportunities for people to do that, and I think does recognise the benefit. I was talking to a professor from the University of Southampton at the end of last year. We were on a grants panel together, and we were waiting for the taxi, and I discovered that, so he works in research computing, and actually one of the things that he's very passionate about is gathering data and information about the so-called hidden ref. So in the UK we have this research excellence framework which very much focuses on the traditional metrics of academia in order to allocate government funding to universities, and what he does is to go out and look and find all the other things that people do that actually contribute to the environment in this hidden ref. But he had been out of academia for 10-15 years before he decided to come back into it. So it depends, but it is definitely possible, and maybe I would say that, you know, if you're applying, if you're in that position and you want to come back and you're meeting resistance from people, then maybe they're not the people you would want to work with anyway, because they should recognise the value of different experience and what that can bring to an academic environment as much as any other workplace.
Thank you.
Super, thanks, Sarah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Really nice presentation. Really valuable advice. Just question, what is the number one advice that you really like us to remember when we?
And can I use two? Can I have two?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the first one was really like, and I think that's the message I wanted to really carry with this job. It's like, yes, outside of academia, getting career out of academia after being in academia, leaving academia is not a failure. I think that's one thing. If there is one thing to take out of this, is that's it. And because when you're in academia, you really feel if you leave it that you have failed something, but that's actually not the case. You have still learned a lot, and you are just moving on to something else, and your life, your personal life, is still what matters in the end. If you find your happiness in academia and you want to stay in it, that's absolutely great. And if you manage to kind of succeed and pass the hurdles, that's amazing. But yeah, the reality is like, yes, the numbers will always be against going to the next step. So that's also a reality. But so yeah, it's important to think like sometimes you just will not have the right opportunities, they are sometimes there, and learning how to find them is also very important. But sometimes it's just like you might finish your contract at a time when, for a reason in your field, there are not that many positions opened. That's possible. And it doesn't mean that you are bad at your job. It doesn't mean that it's just like the opportunities aren't there. So then you have like choices you can make. Like you can apply to a lot of different grants. You can apply to fellowships. Talk to a lot of people to maximize your chances. There are all these things you can do, like the network. Once again, that's the best way to maximize your chances of keeping in, because you know people, then they will tell you about the opportunities. So that's important. But yes, yeah, so number one message is, if not everyone will make it, that's just a reality. And we not want to make it to professor, that's a reality. But there is no shame, and this is not a failure to just move to outside of academia and find a job, hopefully a job you like, and then just also feel fulfilled there. I think that's the way, because it's just also a learning process and just like life. So, and then the second would be, yeah, even then, like, don't forget that you are learning a lot during your PhD, postdocs, etc., like in terms of skills and in terms of maturity, in terms of your experience of life. So that's also the other thing, that you are much more desirable on the job market than you realize. So, yeah, thank you.
I guess you would say the same thing, right, Sarah?
Yes, I would. And maybe the one thing I would add is that certainly in the UK government deliberately, through its funding agencies, funds more PhD positions than it provides funding for postdoctoral research, and they're fully aware that there will not be a commensurate number of permanent academic positions, and they do that because, or at least they tell us they do that, and I think this is not an unreasonable thing, that they see that training people to PhD level, where they acquire critical thinking skills, all of these project management skills, the ability to really bring together lots of competing demands and competing high level problem solving is valuable to the UK and society, and I guess they're mostly focused on economy, but society in general. So, and I think that's maybe slightly different in some other countries, but not hugely different. So there's, I guess perhaps as an academic community, we need to set expectations better for students coming in, and really reinforce this idea that actually you can do research in other environments. If you don't do research, that's not a failure, it's a valuable contribution to society, and actually maybe you might be happier as well. So yes, I would echo that not ending up like me might actually be a benefit, and it's definitely not a failure, and just be mindful that actually you have skills that most of the population still don't have, and so you're adding a huge amount of value to society, whatever it is that you end up doing.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. Any other questions in the room? Yes, if you could, because you're at the end of the table, just try to talk in the direction of the microphone. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the talks as well. I actually have two questions. The first one is because I feel like everyone mentioned that they kind of started out something else that they ended up doing in the end. Was this kind of, it just happened, or was it also in a way a deliberate choice to try something else? Because I feel it's a bit intimidating to say, okay, I apply for a position that is maybe something I haven't like explicitly studied. Maybe you could, I don't know if it's really a question or how to frame the question.
So did you catch that, Sarah?
Yes, I did, and to be honest, I feel like I've mostly fallen into the things that I've ended up doing, and so I think the one thing I would say is, so if you know that you consciously want to make a change, then be brave and do it, but also just be open to possibilities. So I've ended up doing what I'm doing in many respects because it's been outside of my comfort zone a bit, and sometimes it's felt like it's too far outside of my comfort zone. But usually in the end it works out okay. So you have to gauge for you where that kind of line is. So you don't have to go out there and apply for things deliberately, but if you make contacts, and I guess it comes back to this idea of networking and just talking to people and finding out what others do, and just if there are opportunities there, then thinking, well, actually, is this something that I want to do, and then maybe taking the leap that way, but equally saying no, okay, I'm going to go in this direction.
Jean-David?
So I will echo that. Like, flexibility is very important, being able to adapt. So if that's something you want to do, like being also like an expert in one field, it's very good. But also like, for me, I've kind of searched this opportunity, especially at the end of my first postdoc, as I said, was like just I took like the work to do or further works from my PhD. So it was really in the continuation. But I decided at the end I wanted to try something a bit different, challenge myself a bit further. And so when I saw this multidisciplinary project, I was like, okay, because also like with the background of previous discussions, just I want to try this. I know it's going to be challenging. Like, you know, I had to learn astrophysics in 2 years or less than that to be able to carry out the project. And so, but what was also very important in this case is that, yes, I needed to learn all these things, but also I knew what's important is not to hesitate to ask people for help with this. Like I was very lucky. I was surrounded by a great team on every step of the way so far. My PhD supervisors were great, amazing supervision team. We had also like my boss in Germany. We had some discussions sometimes about some things, but on the whole, also went very well. And it was like usually discussions, you know, like argumentative. It's just kind of, okay, look, I think I am right for this and this reason. And like, it would never be like, you know, an argument. It was just really discussing. And then like when I arrived in Switzerland, where I did this multidisciplinary project, people knew like I was a geologist in an astrophysics department. So people were like, so I would ask the questions, like, you know, because people would use acronyms and would use like very advanced words and jargon. And I was like, okay, can you explain to me in simple terms what that means? Like, imagine I don't know anything about astrophysics, which, to be honest, I didn't know that much about it. So, and tell me. So don't hesitate if sometimes you feel out of your depth, maybe because you started a new project, or maybe because even in your own project there is something suddenly that's you don't get, like, yeah, talk to people, people who might know, find who knows, and don't hesitate to ask them. Usually people will be very happy to help, I think. So even if you do take the jump into something that's a bit different, of course, if it's too different and you say, okay, there is no chance, if it doesn't interest you, then I would say kind of, yeah, probably don't go for it. But if it's something you are curious about and you feel that you could do it, maybe with a bit of help, yeah, it sounds like something personally, it was really exciting and I really, really enjoyed it. But I know not everyone will. But if it's your thing and if you find yourself falling to another of these projects, yeah, go for it. And if you think the conditions are right, that's a thing. That's really important.
I'm afraid we're at the end of the session, so I'm going to have to draw it to a close. But if anyone has any more questions, obviously Jean-David is here. I would encourage you to just ask him about himself, because he's got so many interesting things. So I didn't even know you scuba dive, for example. We talked about so many interesting things last night. So just ask him about himself during the week. And if you have any questions for Sarah, I'm sure I can batch these together and pass them on. Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah, for being very generous with your time. I know you're very busy. Thanks, Jean-David, for doing a presentation at such short notice. And thanks for everyone for some great questions. Bye, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.